I'm kinda nervous, I murmured, and my husband John tried to calm me down, exasperated. Dad's busy with work and won't be home, so it's just Mom right now, and that mill is the problem. I muttered under my breath, careful not to let David hear. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had always looked down on me because I only had a high school diploma and couldn't afford college due to family circumstances. She would ask everyone she met about their educational background and would only continue to associate with those who had higher education. For those with lower education, she treated them with a harsh attitude, as if talking to them was a waste of time. And now, I had to meet this Margaret. I was so anxious that I wanted to run away immediately. My name is Emily. I'm a 30-year-old office worker. After graduating high school, I worked hard to support my family's finances, and before I knew it, I was in my late 20s. My mother kept hinting, I'd love to see some cute grandkids soon. I myself felt the urgency to get married, but at around that time that I met my husband. We were introduced to each other through a colleague at work, but to be honest, my first impression of him was pretty mediocre. Even after we started dating, that impression didn't change. In fact, he seemed even more rigid and serious. But having little experience in dating myself, I thought, at least he won't cheat, and being serious is a good thing, and so I stayed positive. Then, on the 3rd anniversary of our relationship, David proposed to me, and we were on our way to meet his parents. When we arrived at the front door, I slapped my cheeks to psych myself up. All right, it'll be fine. I'm going to be the wife of their beloved son. They won't be hostile towards me. David had told me what his mother was like. When David mentioned me to her, she showed strong disapproval because of my low educational background, but I couldn't turn back now. I steeled myself and entered the house with my husband. Inside, his mother was sitting in the living room, waiting. Oh, welcome back, David. Yeah, I'm home, Mom. The two continued their conversation. Hey, aren't you going to introduce me? I felt a sense of unease, but considering it had been a while since David came home, I convinced myself that his mother was just happy to see her son. Nice to meet you. I'm Emily. This is a little something I brought for you. I gave her the gift I brought. David had told me his mom liked sweets, especially pound cake, so I bought some from a famous bakery in New York. It was quite expensive for just a cake, but I hoped it would make a good impression. As I handed over the gift bag, she almost snatched it from me. I tried to explain. I heard from David that you love pound cake, so. Before I could finish, she sharply retorted, I'm not your mother-in-law yet. Her rudeness left me speechless. She continued, glaring at me. Are you trying to make me die early with all these sweets? The absurd accusation left me fumbling for words. No, that's not what I meant at all. I looked to David for help, but he turned away, as if blaming me. Our first meeting ended in the worst way possible. Even though I visited a few more times after that, every visit left me with a churning stomach. My relationship with his mother remained terrible, and after marrying David, I ended up living with him and his parents. Hey, Emily, have you finished cleaning the bathroom? This soup has barely any vegetables. It looks so cheap. Could you deliver this for me? My back hurts. The newlywed life I had imagined, full of freshness and glamour, was nowhere to be found. Living with my mill was a complete nightmare. I was responsible for all the housework, and if I did anything differently from her way, I was forced to correct it. She constantly belittled me, saying, Why isn't this done yet? This is why people with low education are like this. I bit my lip and endured it, unable to talk back. My father died in an accident when I was young, and my mother raised me on her own. We had no financial stability, so I couldn't attend prep school, but I was smart and did well in school. My teachers encouraged me to go to college, but I started working right after high school. We didn't have money for college, and I wanted to help my mother as soon as possible. My mother cried and apologized, but I didn't mind. I was happy to support her, and it was my greatest joy to help my mother, who had become smaller and more frail. However, my mill looked down on my family background without mercy. Don't you know, single-parent households are awful. My mill's family had been civil servants for generations and valued background and lineage, graduating from a 4-year university and getting a stable job as a civil servant. To her, these things were a family tradition that must be upheld. Naturally, she disliked everything about me, who went against all of this. Why don't you try to be more like David? She often compared me to my husband, who worked at the city hall. She even spread rumors to the neighbors saying, "A woman with just a high school diploma isn't good enough for my son." I feel like the neighbors are watching me. Because of that, it made me self-conscious when walking outside. My husband's house was relatively large, with several big rooms. However, I was given the smallest, darkest room because it's for guests. My husband, my only hope, didn't help and acted indifferent. Why is it only me? Even if I complained, no one would listen. My Phil was busy with work and rarely came home. With no help from my husband, I had to endure my Mills treatment alone. One day, while working in my room, I heard my Mills' loud voice coming from the living room. "How many times do I have to tell you, we need this?" "Yes, but even so, it's for when we have guests." Still, do we really need such expensive furniture for a room no one uses? It seemed like my Phil was trying to calm her down. Recently, my Phil had been receiving several high bills, which he didn't know about. When he asked my Mill, he discovered that she had been using his credit card to buy expensive furniture from overseas. "This is too much. No matter how much money we have, it won't be enough. You need to think more about how you spend money," my Phil said to my Mill. "What? While you're away from home for extended periods of time, I'm the one keeping this house together. I deserve a little something in return, don't I?" With that, my Mill stormed out of the room. As I watched her leave, I thought to myself, I'm the one who does most of the work around here. "Would you like some tea?" He softened his expression and said, "Oh, Emily, I'm sorry you had to see that." My Phil wasn't home much due to his business trips, but he had been grateful when I helped him with computer problems recently. Since then, he would occasionally ask me for help with his computer. "When I first met her, she wasn't like this," my Phil said with a bitter smile. It seemed my Mill hadn't always been like this, and her behavior and spending habits had only changed in the last few years. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." I knew my Phil traveled around the country for work and couldn't be home often. I now deeply understood how exhausting it was to have no place to rest your mind and body. Still, I respected my Phil for fulfilling his roles as a father and husband. "I think it's time to end this. David is an adult now, and it's probably best to part ways with Margaret." I was stunned when I heard those words from him. "What? Part ways? Do you mean divorce?" I couldn't hide my surprise at his sudden revelation. "Yes, I've been talking to Margaret about it for years and have been preparing for the process, but..." He trailed off. Apparently, despite his suggestions, my Mill refused to consider divorce. "I see." But I was curious. Why was my Mill so attached to their relationship? To be blunt, she didn't seem to miss my Phil, who was often away from home. It felt like there was another reason. My Phil then reluctantly confessed, "It's not just her reckless spending. I think she has another man she sees often." "Ah, that makes sense," I thought. She probably feared that a divorce would expose her relationship with this other man. She needed money to see him, which is why she couldn't afford to leave my Phil. Wait a minute, now that I think about it. I remembered something relevant to what my Phil had said. I briefly told this to my Phil. He seemed shocked and confused at first, but as I continued, his face turned red with anger at my Mill's actions. "I can't believe this. I've put up with it for so long, but I can't take it anymore." With that, my Phil pulled out his phone and made a few calls. After the calls, he looked at me seriously. "Emily, I'm sorry to ask this, but I need your help." After listening to his request, I thought for a moment and replied, "All right, if I can help, I will. I'm really sorry to burden you with this right after joining the family. Thank you." He looked apologetically to me, but then he packed a few belongings and left the house. As I continued my routine of working and doing house chores, I overheard my Mill yelling on the phone. "What? No, that can't be right. The card isn't working?" It seemed she was speaking with a store clerk about a purchase. "What do you mean, I need to pay immediately? I can't come up with that much money on short notice." The conversation was about a recent purchase that hadn't been paid for, and they were demanding immediate payment. "What is going on?" She hung up and called someone else. "Hello, Thompson? My credit card isn't working. What do you mean you're not giving me any more money? What do you mean? Hey, hello, Thompson, hello." She was furious, her face red with anger. So it's finally started. I thought to myself, A few weeks passed, and my Phil hadn't returned home even once. It seemed he had also stopped transferring money to my Mills account, which initially made her furious, but she gradually became more anxious as her funds dwindled. One day, my Mill approached my husband and me while we were together. "David, I need some money. Can you lend me some?" She pleaded with him, and he glanced at me before replying, "I can give you a little, but how much do you need?" "There's something I want to buy, so I need about $1,500 for now," she said. "What? I don't have that kind of money. I was thinking more like a few $100s. "What? You must have $1,500. All right, then just lend me $500, she continued to beg. David, looking very uncomfortable, said, "Mom, actually." He then revealed to her the shocking truth. David had quit his job due to workplace issues and had been helping me with my work, earning some pocket money. He kept quiet about it because his mother can only tolerate civil servant jobs. "What? Then who has been paying for this household?" "Me," I said quietly, stepping forward. What? But how? Where did you get that kind of money?" My Mill seemed clearly confused. Indeed, coming from a single-parent household, I couldn't afford to go to college. However, my mother did everything she could to ensure I never felt poor. She took me to the local library, helped me with my studies, and sacrificed her own sleep to support me. Truth be told, my mother was an elite who had graduated from a prestigious four-year university. After my father passed away and she fell ill, she had to leave her job, but until then, she had been a manager at a well-known major corporation. She met my late father at work. She often spoke fondly of my father, who she met at work, saying, "Your father was such a brilliant man." I inherited my parents' intelligence, and after graduating high school, started working immediately. After 2 job changes, I now work at a major consulting firm. My annual salary surpassed $100,000 a few years ago, and I had saved a substantial amount. Yes, I didn't go to college and we were poor, but my current income is significantly higher than most people my age, and I have considerable savings. My Mill stared at me wide-eyed. "Oh, I see," I thought. "Well, I guess I was wrong," she said, forcing an awkward smile. I continued. "I'm currently covering all the household expenses, living expenses, taxes, and car loans. Phil has already approved." My Mill was shocked to hear me mention my Phil. She said, "Why would Thompson?" But mid-sentence, "Let me explain," intercepted my Phil, who had just returned. "Thompson." Ignoring her shock, my Phil continued. "I asked Emily for her help." He smiled at me before facing my Mill. "Margaret, I'm divorcing you." With that, he placed a document in front of my Mill. The document had divorce agreement written on it, and my Phil had already filled out his part. What? We've discussed this. "Yes, and you've been seeing another man and using my money for it." He glared at her. My Mill was at a loss for words. "I've completed the necessary paperwork. All that's left is your signature," my Phil continued. "We're selling this house. Given its location, we found a buyer quickly. It'll be sold by the end of the month." My Mill looked overwhelmed by the rapid developments. "A portion of the money will go to Emily for all the trouble we've caused her, and I'll be claiming alimony from you." He handed her another document. It included key points for legal proceedings in court. Realizing she had no other options, my Mill collapsed in defeat. Being home often since I was working from home and doing house chores, I had noticed Mill dressing up and leaving frequently. Following her one day, I saw an unfamiliar man pick her up in a car. After witnessing this several times, I was certain my Mill was having an affair. When I told my husband, he was shocked but agreed to wait and see. However, after hearing what my Phil said the other day, I revealed everything. My Phil acted swiftly, visiting a real estate agent and a lawyer that same day. Now, my husband and I have bought a new house with a yard. The money from the sale of the previous house was more than expected, and combined with our savings, we were able to afford the house. My husband, feeling remorseful for not being helpful before, now helps with most of the housework while also helping me with work. Next year, we plan to ask my mother to live with us. At first, she hesitated, but I told her, "We'll need your help when we have children." With that, she agreed and smiled. In that case, as for my Mill, she sold all her expensive furniture to pay the alimony to my Phil and now lives alone, working part-time. She came to our house several times asking, "Can you lend me some money?" But I turned her away, saying, "I'm just a high school graduate."